Hey everyone, happy Friday and welcome to the game on Pack Slate Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We've got a great show ahead of us today. We've got none other than Alyssa Miller joining us here in a few minutes after the news, so you won't want to miss that. Before we get going, don't forget to like, share, comment. If you want to get involved, if you want to be in the conversation, and you want to be on YouTube, it's youtube.com/PackSlateCloud. That chat we can pull up right here live on the show. And let's jump straight into the news.
Man,
Matt?
Dom, what a couple of weeks. It's been right a boom, backed up by CompTIA CCF, backed up by some working group things. It's been a crazy week. So super excited to be here. We don't have a lot of news articles, and that's kind of on purpose. We really wanted to spend this time listening to Robin's words and then also getting in with Alyssa to hear a couple of things that are very, 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 very much fundamental things that need to be heard on how we need to think about cybersecurity. So I'm stupid excited about that. Let's roll the first article and get started with this. All right, lockbit attacks continue via ConnectWise Screen Connect flaws. Dom, you want to go with this one, and I'll tackle the second article?
Sure. Let's see here. Exploitation of two critical ConnectWise vulnerabilities continues to mount, with many attacks attributed to ransomware groups such as Lockbit. Last month, ConnectWise disclosed. Blah, blah, blah. We all know this, right? These are the famous Screen Connect vulnerabilities. I sure
Yeah.
as hell hope you know about it. Yeah. So let's see. February 19th is when we started seeing exploits. Does that sound about right? So
Well, that was just when they announced the disclosure on the 19th, and then we started seeing some activity
That's
of a
right.
POC the 20th, 21st, somewhere in that time frame. So yeah, something like that.
So,
And we don't have to dig into this too much, but
yeah,
Trend seeing it. Coalition as a cyber insurer is saying that we're seeing Lockbit ransomware gang. But the point, I guess, the takeaway from this is if you're watching this and you still haven't patched, and even if you have patched, but you were one of those people that had a users.xml file that was manipulated or in other ways had part of the IOCs of some of the known IOCs or indications of compromise were being used, then if you haven't done an incident response, you're definitely looking down the pike at something bad in the future. They didn't just grab access and then do nothing with it. We're seeing these, 2 weeks later, these initial access brokers selling and having other ransomware gangs come involved. And what this brings us back to is, the data set I've been tracking, Dom, right? When I first started, for everybody who hasn't followed, when this first came out on the 19th and 20th, I pulled from Shodan a list of Screen Connect servers, a cohort of 1,000 Screen Connect servers. Of that cohort of 1,000, 465 regularly responded, and of that 465, we only saw, at maximum of me tracking it, 30% get patched. Right, and to put this in perspective, those two CVEs of 10s or the vulnerabilities of perfect 10 and 9 point something, were I could put a front slash that allowed me to reset up the user database and have an admin user that I could then do whatever I want to all the attached machines. That means that I could implant persistence. I can do things that create persistence on that box and lateralize. There's paths that exist. So I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but TLDR, make sure that you have patched your Screen Connect, and if you have any indicators of compromise, it's not all that hard to burn the damn thing down, right? It's not all that hard to build a new Screen Connect instance, maintain the other one for forensic evidence, and destroy the actual running aspect of it once gathered, and then run it on another Screen Connect server, right? We've seen now, Dom, 7 incidents through the ERT, the emergency response team from CompTIA. And one of them was a Screen Connect instance, and it was exactly this. They had a user XML file. They didn't have any indicators of compromise beyond. And the question was, what do? Burn the son of a gun to the ground. Maintain it for forensics evidence, but otherwise don't allow whatever might have been done to be a phantom, and especially as easy as something like that is to redeploy, right? That is literally my RMM pushing out a new script to WMIC, remove the old agent, and add in a new agent. I mean, I've done this more than once, right?
Just to perhaps overstress, because we did that episode with Tiffany and we walked through an entire kill chain. We're still in the beginning of that kill chain for the most part, right? That persistent access that's very marketable. It's probably expensive persistent access. So, yeah, I don't know. I would have burnt it to the ground, to be honest, by now. I may have burnt it to the ground anyways, just to be safe, even if I was properly patching.
And if you are promptly patching and you are staying ahead of it, right, then that's fine. If you have a healthy ability to know what your posture is, if you have a healthy logging, if you have healthy third party centralized logging, if you have, there's a lot of these factors that come to play that start making it easier to answer the question of, am I compromised? What's my risk? And show that you did a risk analysis and show that you were able to make decisions moving forward. And maybe somebody listening as a guest who actually has quite a bit of experience here might punch me in the face for some of the things I'm saying, but that's why we brought Alyssa on, is that she is definitely the person to say how she feels 100%. So, and it's fun being able to say that, and she can't speak back right now, so it's only this moment now. But anyways, all right. So moving forward from, I see the face. Moving forward from Screen Connect, let's go on to the next article, and we'll get quickly to that conversation. I want to go through this one, and I want to try to read this full, the whole thing, because I want it to sink in. Prominent Sacramento law firm sues for $1 million after falling prey to ransomware attack. A prominent Sacramento law firm represents police and officers and sheriff's deputies in the capital region is suing a firm. They call them a computer firm in this article. It's an MSP for more than $1 million, alleging that after hiring the company to provide cybersecurity, the law firm was hit with a ransomware attack. The Mastagni Halstead law firm filed a lawsuit in Sacramento Superior Court this week, and this was earlier this week, against Landtech LLC, claiming that because of the cyber attack last year, Mastagni Halstead was forced to pay a ransom to regain access to its data. An office manager at Landtech, who would not give her name on Wednesday, declined to comment. And Terry Berg also did as well, if I remember correctly, names the owner of that. And they also name Acronis. Landtech did not respond to a subsequent email request for comment, and Acronis denied any responsibility for the cyber attack. Law firm founder Davis Mastagni also did not respond. But it alleges that Black Basta, a Russian-speaking group first detected in early 2022, has been blamed for hundreds of ransomware attacks, and resulted in payments of $100 million, right? Actually attacked them. In the first 2 weeks alone, at least 20 victims were posted to its leak site. So they're given the profile of this. So they're talking that Black Basta actually nailed them. While primarily targeting organizations within the U.S., I don't care about all this. I wish we could fast forward. Give me a sec. Threat actors use the ransomware of additionally impacted organizations based in the United States. So that's all about Black Basta. Again, continue. And actually, you know what? I probably won't read the rest of it. I can go from the stuff that we did get out of it in this. But in this lawsuit, they allege a couple of things. Number one is that there was an oral agreement between the MSP and them that didn't clearly define the MSA, or the managed service agreement, of this activity. That's one of the alleged points in this, right? Thank you. It's one of the alleged points in this. The other, though, is a strange one, and why Acronis' name comes out of this conversation, at least from the conjecture. And if you want to look at the long form, me, Tom Lawrence, and Jason Slagle did a long breakdown of this a couple days ago on our streams. But basically, they're saying that they leveraged a service principal potentially that is built into the Acronis software to gain access to go to the Acronis background and actually egress data from the Acronis platform, is what the alleged statement is made. And then they destroyed the backups, right? So it's a perfect scenario. Right. You have the data, you have the backups destroyed, you have the data ransomed, you have this perfect CIA triad compromise. And so the argument is that the MSP should have known when they first detected this level of egression and they stopped it. They had some network connectivity issues. There's a lot of conjecture here, so I will say there's conjecture. But they basically said that there is data going out. They stopped the problem. The network health got back to fine. And then the threat actors pivoted and actually did still ransom, right?
Oh, so, interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to read this before the show. They're saying there was a weird network event in which I'm assuming upload was saturated.
That's a guess. Said, that part's the guess.
Yeah, allegedly, right?
It's an Occam's razor supposition. Let's put it that way. It's the simplest answer. Yeah.
And the response was fixed network, make people happy.
And now fixed. Fixed network fixed. Right.
That is that would have been me at one point, though. So
me too.
Tough.
Oh, I'm not going to point fingers. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think you have this understanding of we're just trying to fix the problem, and RCA doesn't always happen. But let's just assume, in a perfect world, the MSP had responded. What's on the hook? What are you on the hook for? If you're an MSP out there listening to this, the real conversation is, what have you written in your MSA? Have you started talking about concepts like shared responsibility matrices and the understanding of what am I actually here for? What do I actually do? And getting that on paper, right? Brad Gross is rolling over in his live grave right now over this conversation.
You know, we were
actually seeing this stuff.
I was just gonna say, if you go back a ways, I don't remember how many shows, but we had Brad on, and that was the topic of like how well defining your agreements around cybersecurity and where the responsibility lies, right? So go back through our episodes. We had a long conversation with Brad about this. Maybe it's time to rehash it, but I will say, if and again, you know, we're speculating, we're playing around with facts here, but like, I think if I'm an attorney, I'm going to see the fact that they engaged in it, fixed the thing, and did not. I think that puts this in a tough spot in today's landscape, right?
Yeah.
Versus maybe 10 years ago when I was dealing with it. So that's
And
interesting concept.
the other conjectured aspect of this too, that I've heard a lot more on CTI in the last couple of days about this is, what if you're a company that has made some method they make to do backup that creates a leveraged possible endpoint to attack that you've known is an issue? How much culpability happens when you haven't dealt with that issue? And I'm not saying that's exactly what's at play here, but imagine you have something that I as a threat actor can leverage and take advantage of. And we've talked about what Microsoft's known list that they won't deal with. It's always existed on Twitter and on other places, right? You have this kind of, not Twitter, but you know what I mean? It's existed, GitHub, sorry, has existed forever, of these like won't fix, but we know they're an issue, right? And you see a lot of those out there. Well, how much of this starts to play out when you're the vendor and I ride up that chain and now create a scenario where I've failed completely? And is that a culpability? And I think that's why Acronis is named in this lawsuit here, is there are some aspects of this that could be culpability in the nature of something they've known about. And it would follow the lines of, secure by design, secure by default mantra that we see so kicked around right now in the current winds of change. So just a lot to unpack here. If you want me on the record, I don't know that this law firm wins this case. I think it probably settles. I think this is something we don't see go.
There's no way this goes to trial. I mean, the losses aren't high enough. The judge is going to tell them to find a settlement, I think.
Figure this out, boys and girls.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
But as an MSP, it should be a call to wake up to say, it's time to deal with these agreements, and it's time to set in stone, what am I doing? And if you don't understand what you're doing, you don't know what those lines are, that's maybe the wake-up call you need to hear.
Well, let's just address, because this comes up on our MSP so often. It is worth every last nickel to invest in that agreement. It is so much less expensive.
Are Eric Tildes and Brad paying you right now? I just want to make sure you're not getting kickbacks here, Don.
I see it all the time. Like, oh my God, this MSA is so expensive, and it saves you. Like, ask your attorney that gave you the quote how much it would cost to litigate. Right? It's a lot. So get your contracts right, please.
That's it. No, that's perfect. I think that's a perfect segue into the B word as Robin Harris gets to discuss. Let's kick over.
Let's talk about breaches. We're always seeing something come across in the news. There's all the IRS scams, all kinds of scams. And one of the things sometimes we don't think about is we don't think about our employees' data. We have our data, employees' data, their children's data in our different benefit systems, and we have different services, medical, and everything like that. When we engage these providers, we don't outsource all of the risk. We still have some risk. And we need to be conscious of where our employees' data is, just the same as we need to be conscious of our customers' data. So there's a real responsibility to protect the data that people entrust us with. And a lot of times we don't put the processes in place to make sure we've closed all the doors and we're doing things to make sure that the data stays safe and secure. And then there's also, I know this isn't something people don't think about it until it happens, but you need to understand what your obligations are to inform your clients and your employees and vendors and partners if there is a data breach. You can have contractual obligations and you can have legal obligations. So the last thing you want to have happen is you have something go wrong and now you're figuring out, what am I supposed to do? You want to have a breach notification process in place so that if something goes wrong, you know how that communication is supposed to flow. There are circumstances where you don't have to notify anyone except those that were directly involved, and this is where there was an accidental exposure of data and it only impacted a small number of people, but you still have to cover it and you still need to record it and you still need to deal with it. And then when you have major exposures, you have to deal with those differently. There may be times when you need to have external legal counsel get involved if you don't have your own legal counsel. So it's part of your security incident management process. You want to have the whole life cycle from, oh no, there's an incident, to what do you do after the incident to make sure everything has been handled properly, legally, and according to your contractual obligations.
All right, Dom.
All right.
So I'm stupid
She
excited
said it, not
about.
us.
Yeah, and she's allowed to say it because she's the one closest to the attorneys that allow her to say it.
Yes, this is true. Yes.
I am happy because we're bringing in Alyssa Miller. It's somebody I've actually been following and seeing on stage for quite a while. She came on my personal show as well, and I'm just super excited to have you on. So let's go ahead and bring Alyssa in for us, please. Alyssa, what up? It's Friday, and I'm keeping you from an airplane flight, but great to see you.
Perhaps, yeah. There will probably be some elevated moments in my near future.
That's funny. I saw what you did there. It was very punny, actually, as it was.
But
So, Alyssa, you know, the crowd that may not know you, we normally speak to a lot of the managed service providers for the small to mid-sized business world, but you've run in a little bit different circles. So why don't you explain, who you are and what you do for me?
Woo! Where to begin? So, hacker for life, or lifelong hacker, or whatever you want to say. I mean, I've been breaking shit since I was a little... Oh, can I say that? Too late?
Oh, yeah, you're good here. Yeah, you're good.
But no, I've been breaking things since I was a little kid, right? I mean, a lot of us did that. We were the kids that took apart our toys when we were little, took apart our parents' electronics. Sorry, Dad, about the VCR. There were only 3 left over screws. It was okay. At 12, I went out and got myself a paper route, and I'm an old, so when I say I was 12, it was like 1989. Yeah, I'm that old. Got myself a paper route, so probably for a lot of people listening, like, we used to send kids around the neighborhood at god-awful hours of the morning, delivering newspapers to people's houses in the neighborhood. All right, that was a paper route. But we got paid to do it. I saved up a bunch of money. I bought a computer, because, that's what kids in 1989 did when they had $1,000 in their pocket. Is this dork. So I broke into a service. I used that computer, broke into a service called Prodigy way back in the day. This was pre-internet days. And that was kind of, I guess you could call that the beginning of my hacker life. Didn't see that becoming a career, but professionally I started as a programmer. I later got into cybersecurity kind of by accident. So I was a programmer for 10 years, or 9 years, I guess, for a financial services firm. And someone from the info security team dragged me over to join her security test team, which I later found out was pen testing, which is just doing what I did as a kid. Yes, cool. So I've been in cybersecurity ever since. But now at this point, I find myself as the CISO for a legal technologies company called Epic Global. I do quite a bit of speaking internationally across the cybersecurity industry. I wrote a book 2 years ago, Cybersecurity Career Guide. So I'm getting my fingers into all sorts of different things, I guess you could say.
It's a call to serve, right? It's kind of interesting thing to play out for a lot of people. Identify with that and all the things you're involved in.
So I didn't catch part of that for some reason.
A little clippy.
Breaking up.
I said it's a call to serve, I think, for a lot of people in our industry. It's the reason we give back and get involved in other things and write books about career guides and things like that.
100%.
Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, especially the career guide, that's where that came from. It was, definitely, I kind of was looking at the industry and I'm hearing all these people are like, hey, I can't find a job. And of course, then we got all these industry rags running around. Oh my God, there's a talent shortage. Well, wait a minute. I got a bunch of people can't find a job. And you're telling me there's a talent shortage. Something's kind of jacked here. So yeah. I mean, my goal was to try to help people get jobs in cybersecurity. And so that's where the book came from. The speaking is, yeah, it's some of it's self-serving. It's a great way to meet people at conferences where otherwise I'm typically the socially awkward person who can be all alone in a crowd of 30,000 people.
Fair.
So I actually found that speaking was a great way to get like intros to people because now they saw you on stage and they'll come talk to you and you don't have to figure out how to break the ice with people. So definitely that was that's where that comes from. But no, I
Yeah.
do enjoy it. I love it because it's a chance to share ideas and then get people's feedback, right? I mean, people sometimes
Yeah.
argue with you about it. They'll
Yeah, I
sometimes
love
share
that.
a different view, but it sparks conversation that I think we need.
I want to bring up, since you brought up the hacker origin. I figure I've not told mine, and I think the statute of limitations have certainly expired on this. But a buddy of mine and I used to run a BBS. For anybody, back to Alyssa's point, for anybody that's not lived this, we used to dial our phones into another system that then was just that one system. That was it, and people could meet there based on however number of lines were coming into that system or set of systems, right, for the BBS. And it was like 6 or 7 usually, unless you had a big trunking system. But anyways, short story was we were underfunded. I think we were very young, and we had to buy our own stuff. Well, I wanted to upgrade modems, and I realized there was a flaw in AOL that you could, America Online, sorry, AOL. I didn't think I'd get an acronym for that. But there was a flaw in AOL that you could buy a modem, and they would ship it to whatever PO box you put in, and they would charge the card on file. So if people didn't secure their AOL accounts, I know it's surprising that people didn't use strong passwords, you could just get new modems all the time, and they would just show up in random PO boxes until a friend of yours was hauled off to the feds. Anyways, short story is Dom's might be similar. Dom, you want to tell your hacker origin story, or is it still too soon? There, young boy.
We'll be fine. I fished the librarian in middle school, and SSO was the thing, but MFA was not. So I did whatever I wanted. I dumped a bunch of data. I deleted the school's website, and irreversible password hashing was also not a thing because that's how I was identified this day. I used a matching password, and it was right there in the table. I guess I don't know.
So for the record, statute of limitations is 7 years. I've looked this up.
Yeah. Ask me how I know, right? We're good.
There's a reason. There's a reason I'm willing to talk about the Prodigy story. I made sure, like, I'm not going to.
Yeah. We don't talk about any of the others, right? Yeah, just the origin. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we've gotten that set, at least where we've all started our horrible little roads of understanding that the world's manipulable around you, and that's really what being a hacker is just understanding that the things around you are manipulable, in my opinion, anyways. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to bring you on, and you're a pilot, and I don't know, the best way to know somebody's a pilot is they'll tell you. So guilty. But Alyssa, I was on, and you and I talked about this, and you said I've got these 2 talks I'm developing, and so I really want to just dig into those. Let's dig into that first one about the human element, right? And it's a little known company that nobody's going to have heard of, but maybe you can elaborate and kind of tell your story and what that talk's going to be.
Yeah, the little known company no one's heard of that no one can stop talking about being that, big behemoth aerospace
It
company.
rhymes with rowing.
Seattle.
Let's call it rowing.
Right.
It rhymes with
Right.
rowing.
Rhymes with rowing. Right. We've all heard a lot of. But no, seriously. So one of the things I love to do when I'm putting together a talk is how can I combine like different parts of my world, right? And a friend of mine refers to it as giving the talk only you can give. I've heard that a few times. And so, all this stuff going on with the 737 MAX series, right? So we had the issues with MCAS where we literally had planes falling out of the sky, something that usually doesn't happen. Recently now we've all heard about the 737 MAX 9 with the door plug popping out of it. And you look at this and there's so many parallels of things that we can draw from this and learn from it in cybersecurity. I've heard people in cybersecurity before talk about the Swiss cheese model, which is something the NTSB and the FAA talk about all the time. It's that we sometimes call it, you could also lump it into a cyber kill chain. It's based off of that theory that, you've got all of these things, all these perfect circumstances that just align in just the right way that something happens. And that alone, just recognizing that there's the cyber kill chain, and I apologize, this is a terrible thing to call it, but I need a better name for it. I talk about the cyber suicide chain, right? Because cyber kill chain is there's an attack coming in, and they have to get all of these things to get to a point of breaching the org or whatever they're doing. But what I like to look at is what is true more to aerospace or aviation. What is the series of mistakes that an org made that opened the door for an attack? And that's something we don't spend as much time on, right? We see one big thing. You guys were talking about patching a little while ago, and well, if we just patch our stuff, everything will be fine and dandy and lovely. Well, no, it won't. I mean, there's lots of other things. And yeah, we can have words after this about, that is so easy, really easily said.
I knew I wouldn't get away with it. I knew I wouldn't.
Yeah. Me and Jen Easterly have had a couple conversations on that one. So yeah, I have words for you too.
Okay, good. I deserve them.
But no, I mean, so some of it's that. But a big chunk of it, and the talk that I'm giving is at B-Sides KC at the end of April. I actually titled it "Taking the Human Element to the Max." I know, I like my puns. All right. But the reality is, when you look at especially the door plug issue, but also the MCAS issue,
I'm going to stop you this time. Yeah. You got to call it out. We don't let acronyms fly here. I've got it looked up. But do you know this acronym? If you do, I'll give you 10 MAT points. If not, I've got it looked up.
Nope, I do not remember what MCAS stands for.
Okay, it is the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It is a flight control law built into the 737's MAX flight computer. So I just had to throw it out there. We like to do that here. Okay, cool.
Explain it now, because it fits with that. No. It's a very logical name. Basically what we did. So here's the thing. This is where it ties into cybersecurity and IT as a whole, right? So what they did was Boeing did not want to have to recertify a new aircraft because it's a very expensive process. Lots of people who have 737s wanted the bigger MAX version of the 737. Yep. The problem was when they made this bigger version and they put these bigger Rolls-Royce engines on there, they didn't fit. So they had to move them. They literally had to move them. And what that did was it changed the flight characteristics enough of the airplane to the point that it would have needed to be recertified as a new series and go through all that expensive stuff. All the pilots who knew how to fly 737s would now have to get recertified on that new plane if they were going to fly that plane, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which for, one particular airline in the U.S., the opposite of Northeast, who flies only 737s, that would have been a horrific outcome. So what Boeing did, and where this, maneuvering characteristics augmentation system came from, is they fixed a hardware problem with a software solution. Sound familiar?
And nothing ever goes wrong with software, at least as I understand it. I've never seen a flaw. Never, not once.
Especially when a small single component of the hardware fails that the software is dependent on.
Maybe a sensor for attitude, or maybe something to that nature. But they only had one of instead of two, potentially.
Right. So what they did was they wrote software that made the plane respond to control inputs like it was a 737. So they were trying to address that human element. Now, as you mentioned, the problem was the system was dependent on a sensor, of which in the default configuration, the 737 MAX 8 only had one of those sensors.
You mean it wasn't secure and redundant by default? That was an option? I'm shocked. What? I don't know how to color this.
Or what was worse was when there were two of the sensors and they disagreed, the system kind of just didn't know what to do. Right? And so it reacted to one, and that's where it thought it was pitched way up, and so it kept forcing the nose down. And, now the pilots are fighting with this system on the plane. They're used to things like autopilot, where you can press a button and turn the autopilot off if it starts doing crazy things. MCAS didn't work that way. It took a little bit more effort, and most of them weren't familiar how to turn it off.
Nor could they potentially fly the plane with those augmentations removed because of that non-training and delineation of the actual hardware elements. Yeah,
and that was the response to it, was if it freaked out, you just disable MCAS. But the problem was, to do that was a process. And, while the pilots had to be, go through training on that, it wasn't really something they focused on because, when is that ever going to happen? right? Is kind of my personal opinion of why. So that's what happened to the ones that fell out of the sky. The plane literally took control and drove itself straight into the ground.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of those cases where it's like we were trying to account for a human element problem, and there was a hardware issue, there was an issue in design, and we tried to fix it with this band-aid solution because the business was driving for other things. And so you look at that from an IT perspective, you look at that from a cybersecurity perspective, how many times do we get forced into those scenarios? And what's a better way to start to look at that? So that's part of what I go into in this talk.
I love it.
Obviously, the other elephant in the room is maybe it's the northern, those
Yeah.
folks.
Blowing a door out the side of the hole, maybe? Is
Really?
it a problem?
Our northern state that has their own airline named after them. Yeah. So we think about that door that blew out, or this door plug, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk, and I don't think people fully understand the relationship of Spirit Aerospace and Boeing, right? And those two started off immediately.
Partner / yeah.
Yeah, I mean, spin-off and blah blah blah, all the things that occurred to create Spirit and what but they literally build these things in Kansas and then ship the whole dang thing to Boeing to be finished. And so what? Without getting into all the gory details of it, you've got one team working to create the stuff, from the ground up, kind of building that first piece. Then you got the team in Boeing who's got to take it and get it ready for the airline, right? So they're the ones that are going to maybe deploy it. Have you seen parallels again?
I am. I'm seeing this here.
Yeah,
yes.
perhaps.
And part of the issue that we're seeing, and I mean, obviously the facts of this one are still coming out, but just the handoff and how certain defects or things got logged at Spirit didn't necessarily translate to Boeing. And that's where it was believed early on that, this situation where ultimately turns out there were 4 bolts that are supposed to hold this plug door, help hold the plug door in place, that were not installed, right? And, those 4 bolts, eventually the door plug kind of worked itself out. It popped up over the top of these 12 retaining studs that are what really hold the door in place, and it popped out. So, you think about that again from a cybersecurity perspective. Here's a case where there wasn't a good accounting for the human element of how do we transition this information.
Yep.
There's questions now about, when was that plug door reopened and those bolts removed? How did they not get reinstalled? Why was there not a subsequent inspection to ensure?
And that goes to policy, that goes to process, that goes to documentation, that goes to validation, that goes to change advisory. There's so many corollaries there, right, Alyssa? Like, even if you get down to this micro level where you're in the tactical operational space, how is this Sentinel-1 supposed to be configured? How am I supposed to actually set these settings? How are these bolts supposed to be translated? A lot of that stuff hasn't been brought through all the way and fully baked. And in cybersecurity, those are those very similar corollaries, and they end in the same things. And I love to go back to your suicide chain. I hate normalizing that, but it's accurate.
I don't like the name.
I don't like it. It's not great, but we'll come up with something. But back to your point of self-harm and self-cause being part of this is, I did a breakdown with Sunil Yu at Right at Boom this year, where we broke down the Cisco breach. I mean, for lack of a better term, they stopped it from being a very large one, but we broke that down by its kill chain. And the way we looked at it was the lens of what safeguards did they clearly fail at in each one of these stages that would have stopped this, right? And a lot of it was training. That's the human element. A lot of it was system design. That's that secure by design failure you see. A lot of it was that handoff of information. So I think this is a perfect corollary. And I also think it's a pretty decent transition spot to another one of the talks that you're having, or at least you're thinking about going. And it's this understanding of, like, when do we not fly? When do we not have enough information? When do we have a known set of information that says we shouldn't be flying? This go, no-go conversation. And I'll kick it off with saying where I went down this path, and that's another one you were like, Matt, I'm already doing a talk on this, dummy. Like, I'm literally already doing this. But I was talking about a flight I did with Keith Bartold in an in-flight in his RV-7 where we were doing aero. And I was saying, as we're sitting on the end of the runway, we're about to take off, he's going switching Magneto A, and he's checking for drop in RPM, and he's switching to Magneto B, and he's checking for drop in RPM, and then he's going back to both. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm going through the checklists, and I'm making sure that if we lose left Magneto, we're still running at a certain RPM that we can continue to fly. And I'm going to check these next 9 things, and then we're going to fly, right? Like, but we don't do that in cyber, and there's a corollary that we're missing so much of that. So why don't you kick us off on that, and then I've got a cool video we can get into about your own experience here. So
yeah, so the talk I'm giving is I'm using a situation, and we'll see the video of this in a minute, of, you know, where I actually had an emergency situation in my aircraft. And it's not, unfortunately, I don't have video from in the aircraft. It's a video that I put together on YouTube to talk about it. But the talk I'm giving is kind of a lot of lessons I learned that apply to incident response specifically from that. And yeah, some of it pertains to checklists and where they're helpful and where they're not, right? and where, you know, we have an incident response plan, but maybe that's not the thing that's going to save us, right? So, you know, it's because I think, you know, a lot of times we think, you know, we talk about those checklists, and in aviation, they're absolutely critical to safety, but there will still always be those moments where something's not happening that's covered by a checklist. And that's where we have to rely on that human element.
yeah, you bring it back to that. You know, Dom, we talk about that, and a checklist gives you a constrained set of outcomes and the next steps, and it's intending to cover so much. But can you speak towards that human element in the middle of the fray, right, where you now have to think outside the box in cyber? Dom, I could come up with a few things.
I mean, the best laid plans to go to war all fall apart when the bullets start flying, right? So
Fair.
I always found checklists and procedures made me really comfortable with the things I could do to react to something. And then if you have a situation where the checklist fits, use a checklist. You know, in aviation, there's probably a lot more situations where the checklist fits than in cyber. But I think when you're in the thick of it, so long as you really understand what the tasks are in that checklist, that incident response plan, you're going to be fine. You're not going to follow it exactly, but you're going to accomplish the mission. Exactly. Yeah, you got to get to the same end road.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we talk about is that, right, Alyssa, you're now in a moment where you are in an emergency challenge, and there's some blend probably of checklist and not checklist, right? Can you speak towards, as a pilot, and some of those corollaries that you think will wind up in your talk, Alyssa?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, we'll talk about the checklist that you discussed, right? That pre-flight checklist and what we call the run-up. So, you know, in my situation that we'll see in a second here, you know, like I do every time, we did a run-up, and we did exactly the checks you talk about. You make sure the magnetos are both working by turning one off and turning the other off, and making sure that the engine keeps running, that you get drop and everything that you're supposed to see. You get an RPM drop when you turn one off. So that confirms that it's working. It confirms the other one's working, and you do that both ways. We check, you know, my aircraft fuel pump is another thing. So I've got 2 fuel pumps. There's an electric one and an engine-driven one. We make sure the engine-driven one is working by turning off the electric one. We also check, there's this, in older planes that are carbureted like mine, you have carburetor heat that keeps ice from forming in the venturi of the carburetor, which I know I'm getting into deep weeds mechanically here. But you test that too, because what you do is you open that up, and it should cause the engine to slow down a little, and it does. And you make sure the engine runs at, you know, idle with that turned on. And so these are all things that we do. But then there's elements that we don't do that, you know, would have maybe helped in this scenario. In this case, it wouldn't have. And that's the other part of it, is even with all the checks you do, kind of your point, Dom, that you're just making, something else can happen that you didn't anticipate, that all the checks in the world wouldn't have told you was about to happen. And when it happens, and you're in the middle of climbing out from an airport, that can be a horrific moment, right? And then comes the other side of this, and that is, what do you do in that moment where you're in a situation you don't even have the time to grab for a checklist that's going to tell you all the things that you have to do, that it's such a critical moment. You need that human element of, as you described, just kind of understanding the systems enough to troubleshoot the problem or to come up with a reasonable response that's going to keep you safest in the moment. And that's what we'll see in the video. And if we want to play that, then
Let's
can
do
kind
it.
of describe
Yeah, let's roll it right now, and we'll go from
early.
there. Yeah.
Hey, Tower Cherokee 6355 Juliet, declaring an emergency. We're having reduced power here.
Cherokee 55 Juliet, Roger. What runway would you like?
Whatever we can get first. Looks like maybe 10 will be landing with a tailwind.
Cherokee 55 Juliet, Roger. Enter a right base runway 10.
Right base 1055 Juliet.
Sky 41 Delta, extend Darwin, tower calls the base.
Extend 4 Delta.
Skyhawk 650, extend Darwin, tower calls the base.
650.
Here, 0 Zulu Golf, clear for immediate takeoff, runway 20, right traffic, right base, runway 10.
Immediate takeoff, Zulu Golf.
Track 67 Hotel, start the right turn westbound when able.
Turn right, hotel.
Coming back, they are having engine issues.
Make a right 360 for traffic.
Right 360 for traffic, 4 to uniform.
The 55 Juliet, do you need any assistance over there at hotel?
Negative, but we'll have to text back to the jet center 55 Juliet.
55 Juliet, Roger, contact ground point 8.
Put it ground, point 8, 55 Juliet.
I just have to ask,
Man.
Alyssa, did you have to have the seat reupholstered for that little pluck of leather you pulled out?
There might have been a pucker mark or two left in the seat.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured.
So let me explain a little bit what you saw and what you didn't see. So me and my flight instructor had flown down that's at DuPage Airport in Illinois, and we'd flown down there as part of my instrument training, and we did a tower tour, and then we get back in the airplane and we go take off. So we full pre-flight, checking all the things, fuel, all the mechanicals, whatever. Roll out, did the full run up like I talked about, ran it up to 1800 RPM, blah, 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 right? Okay, cool. So we normal takeoff, everything's fine. We're climbing out, the engine's making about 23 to 2400 RPM, which is normal at that point. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're probably, I think it was about 600 feet off the ground, maybe 700 feet off the ground. The engine slowed. It slowed to 2000 RPM, and I'm, throttle's full forward, make sure everything, I'm checking everything, I'm looking quick. I checked the key just to make sure it didn't slip and turn off one of the magnetos that we talked about before. Everything looks fine, but it's just not making normal power. And so that's when, right away, my first response was, all right, make a call, declare an emergency, which is something a lot of pilots are reluctant to do in that scenario.
Sure.
Because, okay, I'm not going down. It's still making enough power. It's keeping the plane in the air. So a lot of pilots would be just like, there's a weird tendency.
I'll loop around and land. We'll be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I've seen plenty of those reconstructions of incidents where that happened, where someone didn't just declare an emergency and they crash, right? And so declare the emergency right away, figured out that, okay, the plane is at least flying, right? But you saw
and that's similar. Let's take a pause. That's similar to deciding to declare an incident, right? Is that similar in corollary?
So that is that moment. How many times? How do we stress with users? If you see something, say something. And people are like, oh, I don't really think that's it. I don't want to bother them. I don't want to bother air traffic control. I don't want to bother my cybersecurity team, and they don't report it. Now the next thing is, you saw how short that was to turn around, come right back in, and land. And so there is a whole checklist in my aircraft for what to do for engine power loss, right? Now, it's really focused more on if you lost it completely, but a lot of those things. So I don't really have time because I'm trying to fly the plane. I'm trying to communicate with air traffic control. I'm trying to get the plane set up and configured to land again. I didn't have time to reach down on my left side, pull out the checklist, and read through it. So there were a couple things I knew to do. I checked the fuel pump was on. I made sure throttle and mixture were full forward. I knew the tanks were full. We had just gotten fuel, so I knew I was good there. The engine wasn't running rough. It just wouldn't make full power. So I'm like, all right, this is really weird. So there's that. And that's the part where I was saying before. It's like sometimes the the best checklist in the world isn't going to help you because you're not going to have the time to use it. And that first step, you need somebody who understands the system to be able to react to it. And so, long story short, what it turned out to be was in the aircraft, there are 2 mufflers. 4 cylinders feed into 2 mufflers, and those 2 mufflers have tailpipes that, well, I call them tailpipes, but they're really just exhaust pipes that come out the front of the engine. And inside one of those 2 mufflers, a piece of the baffling that kills the sound and whatever and creates back pressure had broken free and was plugging the outlet for that exhaust pipe. So that's what was happening. The engine itself was running fine. It just
somebody had their foot on the tailpipe, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like when you put a potato up someone's tailpipe.
Right. Never done that before myself, but allegedly.
Without something blasting out of it, thankfully.
Yeah.
So the engine was running and it landed. But so this is one of those scenarios where it's like, okay, this was probably something that had been failing for a while, because it doesn't just up and suddenly break off and do that. But the run-up isn't going to find that, because in the run-up, we never do a full, what we call static RPM test, where you put that thing full throttle with your feet on the brakes and see how much power does it make. And in this case, even if I had done that, it wouldn't have highlighted it, because at that moment, it hadn't broken free yet.
Right.
So like I said, when I took off and I pushed the throttle full forward, I had full power. And then that thing broke free and it became a nightmare. So that's kind of what happens with a lot of incident response, right? Like, we're monitoring and we're checking things, and maybe we're doing our threat hunts and we're not finding anything at the time.
Right.
And then someone detonates that ransomware. And now it's like all the alarms are going off. We don't have a lot of space between us and the ground. We've got to react fast. And yes, we need to engage the incident response plan, declare that emergency, declare that incident. But we also have to know, basically from memory, what are those quick things we need to do right away to isolate, to, understand where they're, what systems are being impacted, be able to, do some of those initial things where that first response is often going to be critical. Sometimes by the time we see it, it's too late, right? And that can happen as well. So in my case, thankfully, the engine kept running. It wasn't too late. There are plenty of stories out there of people who take off and get to 500 feet, the engine quits. And now what do? You
don't have enough time to get back around. Yeah.
Right.
You don't have enough glide slope.
Put the nose down, keep the plane flying, find a place, the safest looking place to get it down and put it down. And that's kind of sometimes what we have to do with incident response, right? It's,
right. Yeah.
It's counterintuitive for us to push the nose over. It's counterintuitive for us as incident responders to not shut down all the systems immediately and let them know that we've seen that they're in our system, right? There's that whole counterintuitive piece. So even that, you see all these little corollaries. And so that's what I'm going to pick apart at CypherCon in Milwaukee when I give this talk.
The other corollary I didn't want to miss, too, is everything in your checklist was the answer to someone's death, right? Everything in your checklist was the answer to, why do we have that second magneto? Why is it maybe a good idea to have a second check on the pitot tube? Maybe why is it like, those are all things that come into that, and yours invariably after that becomes part of whatever they can around service timelines on baffling material, whatever it may be, to change that. And we don't do enough of that in cyber. Right, in cybersecurity, there's this era of victim, shaming and hiding transparency and not sharing some of the. Anyways, so yeah.
I'm so glad you went there, because this actually ties into both talks, but actually more in that Max 37 talk, because this is the part we didn't get into before. Is if you look at how the NTSB investigates these things, and I know this frustrates people. Now the FAA is all about, they're going to shred Boeing.
Right,
7 ways
sure.
on Sunday, right?
Separate of NTSB for this state.
NTSB makes your regs, but the FAA makes your regs. The NTSB, though, when they look at an accident, their sole goal is to document the facts, understand what happened, and provide guidance for the future so that people won't make the same mistake again. And we don't do that in cybersecurity. We have a cybersecurity insurance industry who is sitting on tons of this data that they use as actuarial data that they will not share with the people who supposedly they want to be making themselves more secure so that, they don't have as many claims. Well, if you don't want as many claims, start helping us out by sharing that data. There's nobody else, nobody. I mean, you could claim Mandiant, but Mandiant doesn't see it as broadly because it's only the people who they engage with. You can claim any other IR firm like Verizon or whoever who see a lot of customers. They get a lot of that inside data, but no one gets more inside data and has done more analysis on causes of this than the insurance industry. And yet they won't play nice in the sandbox and share. And that is the exact opposite of what you see with the NTSB.
Exactly.
Where the NTSB analyzes every accident and says, here's what happened. Here's what led to this. Here's all the elements of the Swiss cheese model. And by the way, they don't name names. And, they speak very much in matter of fact in their reports. And that's the thing that we miss.
I am one believer that we should centralize this type of, at least either the data or the actual response of investigations and defense and DFIR and where it's getting managed. I mean, maybe I'm overstepping my thoughts here, but I really think if we ever did handle it like NTSB, we would have much clearer what the heck happens and how do we defend from it.
Well, imagine like a really large ISAL, but their only focus is looking at incidents. Like that's it.
And was this reported correctly? Is this true?
Yeah.
But the problem you have there is twofold, right? So, because NIST and MITRE tried to do this, right?
Sure.
Like, I mean, they probably still are. But the problem is, for them, it has to be voluntary because they don't have any authority to compel that. And none of these corporations, because of things like our other article today with this, MSSP who's getting sued, there's so much worry about liability and litigation around a breach that most organizations don't really want to share much of that information because that's just fodder.
Back to the victim shaming, victim fodder, and now look at the K8s or 8K forms and how that's already impacting stock price. And I think we don't heal from this in this 40-minute discussion, so we can't really completely tackle this topic. But I do think there's a lot of stresses and forces at force right now that are driving towards transparency and driving towards it. At the same time, we're taking a step backwards and suing people for the
the consumer market is just as much of a problem, right? Like if I have a conversation with anyone in my life that's not in our world and you bring up a breach, they're immediately pissed. Like, it's their fault, right? So it's the consumer's perception of what happens when a company experiences an incident is so bad that they're shredded in the court of public opinion. They don't even have a chance to really come out.
Although, how shredded are they? Because, there was this little company that got breached, TJX, and it seems to me they're completely still in business and completely their stock price has recovered. And that's the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a certain level of apathy, too. So it's kind of, we love to badmouth them, but then we forget quick. And we're on to the next.
Why are you trying to trigger us for a whole nother show? This is 100% exactly what we need to dig into.
Because I have lots of opinions and I've never met an opinion I wasn't willing to.
I love it though. That's what I'm just so drawn into it. So that's awesome. We've had a lot of good comments. I don't think we've had time to adequately touch them. I want to do real quick. Tracy Webb, you've been really great in here. Self-inflicted failure chain as a statement is super dope. Instead of suicide chain, self-inflicted failure chain. I love it. That might go to you. Observe, orient, decide, and act as a category for OODA loop, which is to your point, right, Alyssa, when we were talking about flight and the response that has to happen. Then we also had Tracy saying a good security professional's job is just the same as a good pilot. And that if pilot passengers are flipping out because of turbulence, but the pilot knows the indicators or data are just indicate typical flight, right? Just normal atmospheric issue that we're dealing with. And so there's good data that helps you be calm just as much as there are those indications of the death and demise too. And I'm rushing through these really quickly, but hopefully I've covered some of them.
Hold on, we might go a minute over, but I'm going to steal this.
I'm okay with it. Dom's making a call. Executive decision in flight.
You're a passenger a lot, right? On a commercial. Have you ever been on like an airline flight and they do a go around, like they're about to land? It's kind of terrifying first time you feel it, right?
Sure.
Because you're
power
very
up,
small
bail
down
out.
off the ground, and all of a sudden it just.
Yeah.
And I was sitting next to this, random human on an airplane, and they completely lost it. And I was like, well, first of all, the plane's going up. So, like, that's not, there's sky up there. We got room,
Basement, us
Yeah.
in the ground. It's good. Yeah.
Right. And just thinking about it right now, like that was a reaction to some sort of safety issue, most likely. There's a thing on the runway, or there was
A go no go
whatever,
condition potentially.
and nobody else in the plane, or probably not nobody else, but a lot of people on the plane didn't understand that. And it's the same with our users. We do a thing, we shut down a service in reaction to an incident, and everyone's pissed that the service is off because we're not very transparent about, like, no, we had to turn it off. We're concerned here. We're doing a go around. We're making sure this is safe before we let you back in.
Yeah. That's a great corollary too, right? That understanding of the go around and when we have to pull up and be safe. Alyssa, in your case, your go around was actually a go around to land and pull out of this condition and check it out, right?
I don't normally go around on takeoff.
Yeah. It's a no around. Yeah, you're a no around. Yeah, this is going to land right now. One of the things I didn't want to miss covering, and we are getting towards the end of this, and if anybody in the audience wants another episode, we'll bring Alyssa back. This has been just such a pleasure as always.
Yes.
You give back quite a bit. I'd love for you to tell me about, as it is Women's History Month, and we're dealing with women in cybersecurity in general. You're part of the Women in Cybersecurity, or WICIS, Racial Equity Committee, and have driven so much of the content that I consume around this concept and talk. But tell me a little bit about that, and let's give this a moment in the light.
Yeah, and we actually changed the name now to Equity Advocacy Committee to broaden it, because we realized really fast we were focused on a lot more than just racial equity, right? Racial equity is still one of the key focuses of what we do. But there's also gender equity. There's obviously, at the end of the day, equity is everybody should be treated the same. And, things that are beyond your control, as far as your skin color, the religion you were raised in, the gender of yourself and whatnot, none of that should be the thing that impacts how you get treated. And yet we still see it every single day. There's evidence of it, not just in numbers, but in looking at day to day, the complaints that come out of, various parts of the industry. And the thing I can't stress enough is that equity and diversity are not like to make people feel good. This is something that is critical to our success as cybersecurity or as technology people, because it doesn't matter what problem you're trying to solve. If you've got a bunch of people who all come from very similar, same mindset and background and whatnot, you don't get to innovative answers. You only get there, and this is proven in business, you only get there when you have that myriad diversity of voices that you can't get from a room full of people who are monochromatic, monogendered, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I'd add to that, I'd like to take it from this perspective. Why does equity matter? Why does it matter? Yes, the diversity part and the non-homogenic thought. I totally agree with that. But I like to say it's because we're all going to die. Like, if y'all don't know that, we're all going to die. And why would we make it more challenging for one person because of this condition than the other because of that situation when we all die the same way? And I just want us to understand that we're trying to live this world with the same desires, the same hopes, the same dreams, the same want for security, the same Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is non-delineable of that just because we separate in certain conditions or variables we track. So I appreciate everything you do. I think we'll probably have you back just because you enjoy poking at us and having fun with it. So thank you so much, Alyssa, for everything you do for this industry and to this industry. Thank you, my friend.
I appreciate you guys.
Alyssa, thanks so much for joining us. This has been a great episode. And that is our show for the week. Thanks so much for being here. Looking at the comments, it looks like we are going to for sure have to have Alyssa back.
Yeah, potentially.
Don't miss next week. We're going to have Rob Reck on the show, PAX8's new Chief Trust and Security Officer. And I think we're going to ask the question on what is trust. So it should be a pretty fun episode. So we'll see you next Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain. Have a good weekend.